spread out and much more warlike. So you're encouraged to be much more aggressive in Comancheria.
Yeah, that makes sense. I've just gone live. Anyhow, that sounds really interesting, actually, Andy. It almost makes me happy that I have the Navajo Wars because of that. But that the idea of them being like forced to fight essentially, as opposed to like being more predisposed to it, as the Comanche were. But either one, it seems if I like Navajo Wars enough, I will probably end up with both of them as well.
I mean, I'm P500 Navajo Wars now. I'm just waiting for the months to years it takes to get back to 500 at this point.
Yeah.
But yeah, Comancheria is really neat. Like it's got randomness and combat in it, that kind of stuff. But that's, you kind of need that in a solo experience. And the way they kind of progress through the ages is nice because you can sort of count on having a certain number of actions before you're going to get to a victory check, but it's a little bit fluid. And when you've taken so many actions, you start having to basically roll to see if you get another action or if like it just switches to the next round. So you can kind of push your luck a little bit, but you can also really lose bad if you do that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's got risk, but it's basically how risky you want to be with it. Or you can be like my second play of the game where you were, God, what did I draw? Because they have event cards. I think I drew disease followed by epidemic. And it just wiped out like my basically my bands, the military units. So it wiped out all of those practically right at the time. Basically, the Spanish sent in a big ass amount of soldiers to come kick me out. So the game just took a huge dump on me. Like I had no chance.
You know what? It being a solo game, and to a certain extent, like a cooperative game, if you will. It's to me, I'm interesting. I'm interested by it. I think what you said though, like how much do you want to commit to things, reminds me of like Robinson Crusoe. Do you spend 2 actions or you just spend 1? Trent, you've played probably both of those.
I played both of them.
You play both of them too, Andy. Is there any similarities between those guys?
No, the mechanisms are fairly different, but there is sort of like a management to your actions. And there's kind of a push your luck element in the sense that you have to do success checks, which is not by dice, but you actually got a bag of tokens and you draw out of it. And the bag is basically full of some tiles that say success, which is what you want. But the bag is also full of enemy action points. And when you pull those success tokens out until essentially the round is over, those stay out. So the more you push your luck, basically what happens is you're drawing these action points for the enemies to use. And the more you push it, the more you might cause your enemies to retaliate to you. So it's like, basically it's a game about balance. Like I need to do this. Can I afford to push it a little bit more? Can I not? What can I do to make sure I spread? And then there's like basically 4 phases to the full game, and each one has a victory point check. And if you get to that check and you haven't done it, you're fucked. You just lose. But
we are broadcasting live, Andy. Just FYI.
Yeah. That's all right. Anyway,
I know you're fine.
Yeah, it's a really neat game, but it feels much more like a war game. It's very procedural, so it's very like, okay, I'm gonna do this. All right, first you do this, then you do this, then you do this. Okay, now I have to clean up. All right, then I do this, then I do this. Basically, they have like one of those big GMT flow charts, and you're just gonna have that in front of you the whole time.
Yeah, just to help you get through it.
Yeah, but the rules are pretty well written, and the guy did the designer did like a video playthrough. So like it makes sense to me now. But if I just tried to like play it by the rules without doing a practice game, I would have been, oh God, I would have been lost. But yeah,
Definitely.
it's pretty good. Hopefully I will get Navajo Wars someday because interesting. But yeah, and it's the thing, and I'll probably talk about in the review that makes it really good is, in an interview I saw him, I read, people were like, well, what about, cultural sensitivity? Like, how well do you play the Native Americans? Is there anything in there that's portraying them in a bad light? Like, what was it?
Wasn't this guy like? Wasn't this sort of like his like doctoral project, or was he's like some sort of a big time expert, isn't he? Or
Yeah, and what he did is before he released Navajo Wars and Comancheria, like he specifically made sure to take it to Indian tribes where he knew people, so Native American tribes, and had them play the game and look through everything and basically say, did I get it right? Is this acceptable? And he said, I basically was at the point if they said anything was a red flag or didn't portray their culture or history correctly, that he would have not released the game because he got fed up with so many games that involve Native Americans. It's like, well, they're always the enemy or the resource you use or something like that.
They're a resource and enemy, or they're just like the NPC, like, that you just kind of have to essentially exterminate before the game really gets into its own.
Right. And so the goal of this game was to put you in the experience of what these people faced. So in the end of Comancheria, the way you win the game is basically holding out against all the forces of America and Mexico working against you and basically trying to force you onto reservations. And so
how do you win? What is victory? Is it just like holding out longer than you'd expect?
No, there's 4 cards for 4 historical eras, and each one has a victory condition.
Okay, so you can win at different times.
Well, you have to. Well, you can play it scenario.
I'm asking you too many questions right now, Andy. Trent's probably sitting there like, this could be during the episode.
That's probably right.
We can, yeah, those are all going to be good questions. Any business you guys like to take care of here? We are on the air, but we still haven't done our countdown or anything. What do you guys think? We good?
I don't think there's anything, is there?
I'm happy to be able to be recording with you guys. Andy, I think it's been a couple of weeks for you, right? Because last week you were present, but not being heard out loud. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good to have you back, dude.
I basically logged on. I'm like, I'm going to heckle people in chat because I can't do it with my voice.
I was gonna say, yeah, okay, he's gonna heckle people in chat. He does that all the time with his voice. Yeah, he does that while he's on the podcast. So good to have you, Andy. It was just like having you here.
Exactly. Yeah, I was in Tulsa, so
yep.
But that's done with. So anyway.
Yep. And I'm actually, I'm actually going to say this here when we get started. So nothing else, no other business. We can start going. Like we got a viewer here that's joined us. I tried to have our chat out.
I was going to ask, do we still need to mess with the Audacity file or not really?
I'm actually not recording one because Josh, Josh said he's just using YouTube, that it's easier to just like equalize and levels. Our levels are good with YouTube, and I think that they all get recorded on separate tracks through YouTube.
Okay, I just didn't know if I should be messing with it or not. If I didn't have to, I wasn't going to. So
yeah, no, the Longview guy TC, he really wants me to record my own, but I think that Josh said this is just fine. So, and that's what I'm going by. All right, so excellent. Here we go, guys. 3, 2, 1. Hello and welcome to The Good, the Bored, and the Ugly, a podcast about board games. I'm the host, Joe Sallin, and I'm joined tonight by
Andrew Dennison.
Trent Ham.
And tonight we are going to be talking to you, lovely people, all about the game's mechanisms that we feel like maybe we dislike, but we're going to talk about how they might be being used in good ways in games where we do kind of like them. But anyway, essentially mechanisms that we would consider bad to ourselves and how we think that they can be good in some situations. So when bad mechanisms turn good. Anyway, before we get kicked off here, though, I just wanted to say that I'm recording from the Eastern time zone for once here. I'm on the Gulf Coast in Sanibel Island, Florida, and so lovely to be joining you here from the timeshare that my in-laws have. I'm glad to be that everybody had kind of gone to bed so I could still record this week. And anyway, it's just awesome to be joining you guys. So this week I've got a bunch of lighter games brought with me, so I'm still playing games. I actually just finished a game of Watson and Holmes, but I'm really happy to still be able to be here and with you guys, especially you Trent, and you, Andy. It's really awesome, and I'm excited looking forward here to hearing you guys' reviews and what you guys have to say about our topic.
Okay, let's do it.
Let's do it. All right, so let's go ahead and kick off reviews here, because that's what we always do here first, in the good, the bored, and the ugly. We're going to kick off with a review from, let's hear, actually, Andy, you were already kind of going into this, so why don't we hear from you about the GMT solo game regarding the Comancheria is what you're going to be reviewing, Andy, and it's your turn to go right now.
Right. Excellent. Sorry, weird disconnect issue. So I'm going to be reviewing, or at least some sort of initial thoughts, because I don't have a lot of plays in this game yet. But the game is Comancheria, and it's a solo, maybe war game. I don't know. Best way to describe it. But it's a solo game released by GMT, designed by Joel Toppin. So Comancheria is a solo game. So one player, you play it by yourself. And basically, the game is designed to evoke emotions and history of the Comanche Empire. So one of the things that really intrigued me about this was it was a way to kind of look at a part of history that as a American often either A, gets glossed over in history class, or B, gets taught through the whole lovely, manifest destiny, let's gloss over all the horrible things we've done kind of thing. So I kind of got it out of that curiosity. There's Native Americans or people descended from them, in my family and my wife's family coming from Oklahoma, and that her kid's godmother is part Native American, I believe. And so, I kind of wanted to explore that a little bit. And I'd heard good things about his other game, Navajo Wars, which is way out of print. Go P500 it, because then I'll get it sooner. And but anyway, Comancheria is the second in that series. And it involves the Comanches, who are a much more warlike tribe. So there's a lot of more aggression. You're kind of encouraged to attack and raid settlements. And then sort of trade off captives and other things that you might have collected to get resources. And there's basically 4 phases to it that are based on different periods in the Comanches' history. Like the first one, I'm currently playing my 3rd game of this. And in the first phase, I'm kind of working on just establishing the Comanche Empire, running other tribes out of the area or taking them over. Eventually you start working through harder and harder phases where more forces are basically coming to take over your land. So in the final phase, the goal is basically trying to survive. It's trying to keep the Americans and the Mexican and everyone else out of your area to keep from basically having your culture destroyed and put on reservations. And I haven't got to that one yet because this game is difficult, very, very difficult. The thing I really like about it is it's really a game about balance, because it is a solo game, which means there's sort of this player AI that can take place. And it's a really funky system. It's one of those things when you look at this game and you play it and you finally figure out how the mechanics work, you wonder how the heck anyone could have ever come up with this, because it just seems kind of insane. But it's got a very unique AI system. And basically the cool thing is there's going to be different things you have to do that involve what's called success checks. And normally this would be by rolling a die in a lot of games, but in this game, it's pulling chits out of a bag. Some of these chits are going to be a success, and you're going to get things out of that. You collect a bison on the hunt. You get some captives in the raid that you might be able to trade in later for more resources. Those kind of things. But also in this bag are other things. There's enemy action points. So the more you push your luck and keep trying to draw out of this bag, the enemy is gaining action points that they will then use against you when it's their time to act. And so if if I drew really bad, there's been a couple times where I loaded up 11 action points because I didn't quit when I dang well should have. And the enemy just trashed me. So because I didn't really gain much in the way of resources to stop them at that point. There's also going to be event cards that are different things that happen throughout the Comanche's history that can be good and bad. You can kind of buy them into your hand. The other thing you can do is gather these culture cards. So they represent different aspects of the Native American culture. You can develop spirituality, horsemanship, warfare, politics, things like that.
Is it like a tech tree, or is it all separate?
It's kind of a tech tree because they go to levels 1, 2, and 3. So you can kind of decide, do you want to spread out? Do you want to dive deep into one area and be really good at that? And there's no way, or at least I can't think of a good way out of my plays, you're going to end up with all of these in play with you. So you got to kind of pick and choose how you're going to handle things. There is combat. It's a dice-based combat system. You roll 1 die. There is kind of like a critical failure and success kind of thing. So if you roll a 6, you kind of just win. And if you roll a 1, you pretty much just lose. However, within the numbers there, 2 through 5, then it kind of depends on how strong your band is, how strong the enemy you're trying to take on is, and that kind of thing, because the enemies can come out and be quite nasty. That's how I lost my second game of Comancheria. So this juggernaut came out of the west with Spanish troops and just,
the Comanches and the Spanish were allied against you?
No, not this. No, it would have been the Mexicans, wouldn't it? Yeah. So the Mexicans, and it was just this huge army, and I just kept throwing bands at it, and just to be massacred, trying to slow it down.
Well, it depends, Andy, on what specific time period we're talking about, because there would have been a time when it was still considered New Spain, but that would have been.
It was about 1700s is when it starts.
Oh yeah, then part of that would have definitely been New Spain.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that kind of bit in it. But the thing I find just interesting about this game is the history and the culture and the feeling you get out of it. The game is designed to evoke a certain sense of feeling and understanding and what these people went through. And the nice thing about it is Joel Toppin was talking about this in an interview, because, there's a lot of issues that come up with Native Americans where people are kind of co-opting their culture, and a lot of different members of tribes and organizations are not particularly happy about that. Certain baseball mascots and stuff. We won't go into that, but
very much so.
Yeah, but Joel Toppin, he wanted to do right by their history and culture, and so he talked about in an interview how he play tested this with Native Americans he knew of various tribes, and he would, for example, show Comancheria to Comanches and descendants of Comanches, and basically say, am I getting this right? Am I showing you as it really was? And he basically said if he could not be successful at that, he would not release the game. And this is very different, because so many board games, if they have Native Americans in them, it's often about either exploiting them or exterminating them. They're an enemy or something like that. Very rarely are you seeing it from their perspective.
Wow, so cool.
And what everything was doing to them. So, if you're into solo games, I highly recommend it. Complexity-wise, it's a little up there. It's not the worst. And there's really good playthrough videos, and like, you know, GMT always does, there's a really good walkthrough that will just walk you through an intro scenario that's designed to show you how the different mechanisms work. Right. And so that's what I did my first time. And they're just like, okay, you can stop and reset now, or you can just keep going. And and I kept going. That did not end well either. And so
Andy lost the intro scenario. What killed you that time?
No, did I? No, I didn't even make it into the second phase. It's so hard. Like,
the way that the phases work here, you have a specific victory, and does that just mean you continue to survive? And so you're essentially going through 4 different victory conditions throughout the game?
Right. And so, like I said, I don't remember what 2 and 3 is. The 4th is you have to keep so many what they call rancherias. They're, you know, nomadic settlements. You have to keep them out on the board and keep from being shoved to reservations with them. If you can keep a certain number on the board, you've essentially sort of established yourself as a resistance to the American and other forces that were trying to, you know, basically force you off your land. In the first scenario, which is the one I'm trying to beat again for the 3rd time, it's about sort of establishing the Comanche Empire. So now
there's different scenarios in this box?
There's 6 of them.
Well, 6. There's 4 phases, and then the scenarios are a mix of the different phases. So, you know, you can play phase 1 or phase 1 and 2 or phase 1, 2, 3, 4. So you can kind of start wherever you want with that. But right now my goal is I have to have a rancheria in a second area, and I have to have total dominance of Upper Arkansas. And if I can't do that by a certain amount of time, then I just outright lose. Also, if my there's culture points and military points, if those are brought to 0, I also lose.
Cool.
But it's a very interesting game. Like I said, it's very evocative of a theme.
Cool. That sounds really similar to Robinson Crusoe, Andy. And I'm wanting to hear from Trent here, because Trent's played Comancheria and many other of solo games. And I kind of, Trent, would like you, if possible, to maybe put this into perspective compared to, like, say, a solo coin game versus a solo scenario of Robinson Crusoe versus whatever else you have, whatever other input you have on this, Trent.
First of all, I think that I really feel, honestly, like it's a misnomer to call this a war game. It's a resource management game.
Yeah.
I don't get any sort of war game feel when I'm playing it. I'm managing resources. I'm managing opportunities. I'm not like plotting out my battlefield success. I feel a lot more like I get more of a feel like I do from Agricola than I do from, say, Risk.
Well, it's made by GMT, so it must therefore be a war game.
Well, yeah, like 1846 is a war game, and
yeah, I kind of use that term only because I wasn't quite sure what else to call it.
It's a resource management game, as is
sounds like a Euro game.
And honestly, my opinion, so are the coin games. So there you go.
Okay, all right.
I don't feel like the coin games are really war games either. They're resource management games and area control games. It's a solo game. It's fairly complex. I think, obviously, the historical accuracy is really, really high. I think Comancheria is quite a bit better than Navajo Wars. I would like to see Navajo Wars redone with the Comancheria rules.
Okay.
And one of the big things when I think of the two in my head, there are 2 big differences that really pop into my head. Is that Comancheria, you only have basically 7 actions to choose from, and Navajo Wars, you have 10. But honestly, like, the other 3 are, it feels almost like they combined the actions down to a much more concise choice of 7 rather than the 10 or Navajo Wars. You don't really get a more broad range of actual choices in Navajo Wars, even though there's 10 possible actions rather than 7. The 7 just cover everything better. Another thing that I really like better is, Andy mentioned that you're pulling chits out of a bag when you're resolving things, and it's kind of a push your luck thing. In Navajo Wars, roughly more or less the same thing happens, except it's colored cubes out of a bag. And that actually felt to me like, for lack of a better way of putting it, I mean, it feels like you're drawing cubes out.
Like just an RNG?
Yeah, so it feels very much like an RNG. Whereas I feel like there's a much greater diversity of things that can happen out of the chip bag in Comancheria. Definite upgrade. I would like to see Comancheria rules applied to like what Navajo Wars was focusing on thematically.
Maybe they could do that with a small update and not with a whole new reboxing.
Yes, like they're doing with Here I Stand, and they're giving it the Virgin Queen rules.
Virgin Queen update sort of thing.
Yeah, they're doing that's what they're doing with Here I Stand right as we speak. So I wish they'd do that with this.
Okay.
They're solo games. They're fairly heavy, but both Navajo Wars and Comancheria. Like I said, I obviously am giving you the impression I like Comancheria better because I did.
Mm-hmm. My big thing, like, I really love solo. I mean, I enjoy some solo experiences, but I just find that what always happens to me in a solo game is I end up like 5 rounds in, and I figure out that in round 3 I messed up a rule, and it's the reason that I'm still even alive. And then I'm just like, what do I do? Do I just keep playing? Am I done?
When that happens to me, I restart. I just like, I'm done. I put it away. I restart fresh.
The other thing too with Comancheria on that is it did get the nice good GMT treatment in the sense that every chart is on its own kind of card stock thing, and the game's very procedural. So you go step 1, I do this. Step 2, I do this. Step 3, I do this. And it's all spelled out for you. And all you got to do is just follow that chart down. And it's at that point pretty hard to screw up the rules.
Mm-hmm. So they actually did a pretty good job of making sure that it's procedural, and it's not like all these different things taken into consideration. It sounds like you guys have mentioned how heavy it is, but my main question is the real randomness in this game. Like, I mean, is it well balanced? Is it well, like, I mean, what are you playing this game for? Are you playing this game to see if you can beat it, or are you playing this game more to see how history plays out?
See if I can beat it. Yeah. I don't even hesitate.
Wow. So it's gameplay first, kind of.
Yeah, I mean, the theme is fantastic, don't get me wrong, but this is a system you want to see if you can beat it. You're not living out a story.
Wow, I'm really thrilled by what you said there, Trent. I'm super pumped to get, because I've got a copy of Navajo Wars, the prequel sort of thing coming in, and even though, Trent, you've mentioned some ways in which Comancheria updates that system, I am really pumped to get at least into this specific genre.
And it very is, even though there's random, for the most part, it's risk management. So it's like, if I do this, there's a good chance that this is going to be a bad result. Do I want to really try? Do I not really want to try? The way everything's set out is pretty easy to track what your risk is going to be. And I think it's got the right amount of randomness you need to make a solo game a good experience. Like, the dice are not going to necessarily win or lose it for you. That's going to come down to your strategy. But, you know, there's just enough uncertainty so you can't math it all out. Basically, there's enough randomness in it to keep it from becoming just a puzzle.
Which is what, yeah, solo games, absolutely. Yeah, that's what they become. It's just a solo, just a puzzle. If you can kind of solve them, it's over. But you guys mentioned that there is like several... there's several scenarios here, but it didn't sound to me like they were like when you said scenarios and there's 6, like that's like Robinson Crusoe.
Well, there's basically 4 phases. There's 4 big chunks of the history, and a scenario is how many of them and what one you're going to start with. So are you going to, like I said, are you going to?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah. So there's the big one, which is the full game 1 through 4. You can just do 1 until you feel comfortable at it. If you don't really like the buildup of 1 and want to jump into 2 or 3 where things get a little more vicious, you can do that. So it kind of lets you, bring it in, where do you want to start in this story? The overall story is going to be similar in its, historical context, but it's basically like, how do you want to start your journey? If you're doing all 4 scenarios, it can be a very long game. So like the one I've been working on now, I've left set up kind of in my office downstairs, or my wife's office. I just co-opted it for board games. But I've been setting it up, and then basically, I have 20 minutes. Hey, I'll go take a couple turns in Comancheria. So I'll do that, and then I'll come back to it. just kind of, you know, process it. It's the way I play solo games, period. Very rarely do I sit down and just shoot clean all the way through it. Like when I do coin games solo, I do the same thing. I go, okay, I'm going to play around. All right, I'm good. We'll come back to this board state in a bit. But you can do that. You know, you can AP to hell with a solo game and you don't make anybody angry. So it's all good.
There you go, man. That's what it's all about. Any closing remarks you guys have on Comancheria?
I really like it. To me, Navajo Wars and the coin games all kind of belong on the same shelf in my on my game shelf because they're all like games I can play solo in 2 to 3 hours. When I have an evening home alone, those are the ones I'm going to grab, is the coin games or the 2 Joel Toppin games. They're really good for an evening of solo play.
Have you wondered if Navajo Wars and Comancheria could be turned into coin games by adding? Yeah, go ahead.
I think that they could be 2-player. I think that they would work as 2-player coin games like Colonial Twilight is.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah, like one player the forces against, and yeah, I can see that.
That's what they're basically. That's almost a lot. In a lot of ways, that's what Colonial Twilight is like. That's the 2-player one that's set in the French-Algerian Wars.
Yeah.
This could easily be like that. It could have been 2 different 2-player coin games. I mean, you have to change a few things, but it would work that way. And then definitely thematically, it would work that way.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thanks a lot, Andy, for that really in-depth look at Comancheria that got me extremely excited to play the game myself. And it was also mentioned on a comment in our Board Game Geek Guild at you go to Board Game Geek and find us, Really Good, the Board and the Ugly Guild. Anyway, it was mentioned along with a ton of other like war games that one of our guild members thought that I might actually like, which I'm really excited to try now. So, cool
the only other thing I guess I would add to it is, you know, when you see that this game is beautiful on a table, the artwork and design of it's great.
I would highly recommend, like right now, I believe there's copies at Game Surplus, which I didn't mention earlier, but I will take the time now to thank Game Surplus, our sponsor. You can find them on the web, gamesurplus.com. Send Carmen an email, games@gamesurplus.com. He'll be able to track down games for you, and he definitely gets the new games coming out from GMT. He just gets them automatically, so you shouldn't have a problem getting those ones right off the website. But even if you find a game that you want and don't see on Carmen's stock, he'll be able to go and get it for you. So anyway, thanks very much to them for sponsoring this podcast and other really great podcasts out there. Anyway, yeah, Comancheria, I'm 100% behind, hoping to get it very, very soon myself. So that is our first review. And next, for this upcoming review, I'm very interested because when I Googled or when I searched Board Game Geek for the game name Attila, I found 4 different games ranging from like 2000, 2003, 2005, 2015. And all of these games were like very vastly different. And I'm very curious to know which exactly one Trent's talking about, or if he's still going with it. It sounded like you were a little bit on the fence about doing it in the first place.
I considered reviewing a different game, but I think I'm going to wait on that. I haven't quite got my thoughts together on it. The one I'm going to review is Attila 2015. It's the Bruno Feduti abstract one.
Oh, the blue-orange one, like the new one.
Yep. I picked this up because my family really likes abstracts. This was an abstract, and I found it on sale for $4. I was like, hey, I'm going to pick up this abstract and take it home.
$4? Is this like a big box game for $4?
It's Sushi Go size 10.
Okay, all right.
It's not like a giant game, but it's definitely not a big box, and you'll understand why here in a minute. Okay, so basically, here's what Attila is. Imagine a chessboard. Now, imagine that you've taken that chessboard and cut it into a bunch of small pieces, and you only have 4 of those small pieces. You have a 3x2, another 3x2, and 2 2x2s. Okay. That's all you've got. You can rearrange these pieces into whatever shape you want. You can use the 4x5 rectangle if you want, or you can make it in some sort of funky shape, like a pyramid or a tree shape, whatever you want to do with those pieces. Okay. That's how you set up the board. You take turns putting the pieces down, and you make a little rectangle or whatever out of it. Then you each have 3 knights from a chess set. Imagine like you have 3 white knights and 3 black knights. and you take turns alternately putting them on the board wherever you want. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So then you play a game like you're playing chess. You move one of your knights, and then after you're done, you put a counter on the board on any free space that you want that basically eliminates that space from the game. When you're moving your knight, you can move over those dead spaces and over other knights, but you must end in an empty spot. You're not capturing the other pieces. You have to end your knight's movement in an empty spot. So on your turn, you just move your knight like a normal knight in chess, and you put a burn counter somewhere on the board that blocks it off.
It sounds almost like you're just getting to the point where there's going to be a stalemate.
As soon as a player starts their turn and can't move any of their knights to a legal space, they lose.
So it's basically stalemate chess with tiny little boards.
Yep. You can play this in about 10 minutes. It's exactly like it sounds. But here's the thing. This is what I noticed. I've played this a bunch of times with my family. We have played it in pretty much most permutations of my family now with different people playing each other. It feels like a puzzle is what it really, really feels like. More than anything, it feels like you're doing like some sort of like paper and pencil puzzle, and you're sitting there staring at it and you know there's a solution, you just can't see it. Because I think this game could probably be solved with a computer, but I'm not sure. I think it could probably be brute force solved, I think. But a lot of times after about 3 moves, you know it can be brute force solved, and you're trying to do it in your head. So you sit there, and as simple as this game looks, you're sitting there staring at it and seeing whether or not you can see far enough ahead to know where you should be putting your counter. And that's what the game turns into. It's a really, 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 really simple abstract. Take it or leave it. If that's something you're into, this is great. If it's not, if you want to play abstracts that are heavier than that sounds, then you pass this one up.
So do you agree with its Board Game Geek weight rating, complexity rating of 1.5?
Yes, if anything, that's high.
Oh, wow. That's wild.
I gotta be honest, I like my abstracts heavier than this. However, it has been fun playing it with my family. They also generally enjoy heavier abstracts. But we've had a lot of fun realizing that, like, about 2 moves in, the game stops. One player tries to sit there and see if they can piece out how to win. And then they make a move, and then you almost kind of, before very long, agree that the game is over. That's kind of how it's been with our family.
Basically, okay, it's over. It sounds like this game called Last Mouse Left that was essentially like it was a piece of rubber. It was just a single component in a box, and it looked like a waffle. And each little circle on it was a button you'd press, and the goal was to be the last mouse left. And to do that, there was like rules to where you could to like how you could place. It was a really simple, but it felt to me like the same thing you said. Like with a computer, you could easily solve this game.
Yeah, I feel like this is solvable with a computer. Like you could make a board layout, and then just like input a board layout, input your opening pieces, and then just solve it.
Is there any chaos? Okay.
I have a feeling it could be just solved by brute force because there isn't that much decision space.
That's unfortunate. So I noticed you said Bruno Faiduti, and one thing that I've come to associate with him is chaos. Would you see that there's any chaos in this, or no?
No, it's a perfect information abstract. It's just a really, really light one.
Okay. I actually just recently played his game Raptor that he did with Bruno Catala, and that's been getting quite a bit of buzz. But anyway, yeah, I could feel the Faiduti, and I could feel like the chaos coming through. I felt. So anyway, it sounds to me like this is much of a different ilk, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great. It's a good 5-minute game.
Okay. Andy, do you ever play these types of little simple abstracts with Will?
No, not really.
If you're going to play a game with Will, what do you usually play? Do you usually play roll and move?
Sometimes we'll play those. A lot of times me and him will play a lot of the kids series of games they're coming out with. So like My First Carcassonne.
Oh,
cool. What do they call it? Ticket to Ride Journey or something. Basically,
Sure.
My First Ticket to Ride. He really likes that one. Huh?
1800.
Yeah, no, I haven't got 18xx yet. But or Hobbit games or
Yes.
the Tales in Game series, things like that.
Mhm.
Sometimes he wants to play a more typical off the shelf game, and I'm like, okay,
Not with Andy's shelf.
Yeah,
Andy,
not off my
Andy
shelf.
actually, I think Andy would rather play a simple Hobbit game than he would play like Dominion.
Yeah, wait, right? Yeah, Rhino Hero beats Dominion. Yeah, I would go with that.
Considering Andy's never played Dominion, I want our listeners to strike that from the transcript here. Trent, I'd like to appeal to you that I'd like to object. Objection, Your Honor.
Okay.
All right. Anyway, that was Attila, recently published 2015 by Blue Orange Games. Very simple, abstract game, almost too simple, maybe. You be the judge.
Very light.
Maybe solvable too. All right, so now I'm going to review for you guys a game that I brought down here to Florida with me to play with my wife's family because my mother-in-law is just a wordsmith. She's incredibly good with words, and she's always loved playing Scrabble. And that's one of those games that kind of gets thrown around at family gatherings, and every time it gets brought up, I'm always kind of like, turtle coming into my shell. Like I just kind of, can conveniently not be found at the times when they're looking for somebody to play Scrabble with. And I've really danced around, telling them how I truly feel about Scrabble. And I don't think that there would be anything gained by that. However, this game that I am reviewing right now was kind of like my hopeful bridge where it could be a common ground between Scrabble and a game that I would enjoy. And so I don't generally play many word games, but really I don't think as gamers, mostly we're into mechanisms, and word games tend to be really focused mainly on vocabulary, kind of like trivia games where there's a few rare exceptions that maybe include trivia or maybe include words in their structure. But for the most part, we do not play many word games. At least I've not had many experiences with them. The game I am reviewing is called Word Domination. It was designed by Jeff Beck and just released from Kickstarter. I just received my Kickstarter shipped copy recently. And I'm reviewing it right now because I've just got a chance to play it with my wife's family. And I played it before with gamers, and I played it once more before that just to try to see how it went. And anyway, my thoughts on it. Well, I guess first, just quickly, it's like a grid of letters. And the distribution of these letters is fairly similar to the distribution of letters in, say, Scrabble. But the kind of difference here is that instead of it being like all the players that have their own private sets of letters and you're trying to play, like, say, 7 of them, everybody is given a single letter. And on this grid that already starts the game populated, and it's a larger grid for more players, you can play anywhere, meaning like everything that's out there is a possible letter for you to use in a word. The only requisite is that you have to place your letter that you've drawn next to something else to grow the board as you're playing, and then you have to use it. Every time you use a letter in a word, you will put one of your little blimps, or if you turn them upside down, they're submarines. Kind of a cool little meeple that can be both. I like that. It obviously not a big deal, but I really do kind of like that it's both. And I don't even know if they meant to do that, but they did. Anyway, you'll put one of those down on every letter you use. If there was anybody else's letters that you used, you kick them off and take control of it. And if you ever use a letter for the second time, which will only happen on rounds 2 through 6, as this game plays over 6 rounds, you will then be able to steal that letter, which you claim territory for it. And then at the end of the game, you get a point for every stolen letter, and your stolen letters will score an extra point if they are in an adjacent group of 3. So you've got a little bit of a spatial aspect to it, and that's why you should be intentional when placing your letters around the outside. So it's a pretty basic framework. One of my favorite things about it is that one of the rules is that you cannot use the same word twice, meaning if somebody uses the word like, game, you could not say games or gamer. It's, it has that sort of like franchise rule where you can't use these words more than once. And I really like that because nothing to me frustrated me more than in Scrabble when somebody would just play like a single letter and it formed like two separate words, one of which was, you know, like a simple 2-letter word. And my worst experience in board games, I think, there's many of them, but this one is the one that's coming to mind right now, and that's when I was in a Scrabble tournament early on in my about 4 years ago, and somebody asked me if I had also memorized every 2-letter word in the English language. And at that point, I wanted to be somewhere else besides in that Scrabble tournament because it was misery from that point on. Here, you don't have to worry about that. It really is just about getting the biggest word you can while being judicious and trying to get the best combination of taking over your own letters and taking possession away from other players. Because essentially, to be able to claim a letter, your letter has to be able to sit out there while everybody else plays. My thoughts on word domination are it does exactly what I was hoping for. It's like Scrabble, but it plays in like 45 minutes without the things that I got hung up on in Scrabble. And it's simple, easy to teach to my family, to my wife's family. It is doing everything I'm hoping it would do, and I really, really like it for that. Another game that does this kind of-ish is Paperback, but one thing that I really disliked about Paperback was that it felt like you were always building the same word, and especially since you had a deck of letters and they were all the same, it just was like just felt like building boring words, the card game. And here, you know, you're forced to actually use different words, so it's not just, you know, the words play here is the core of the game, and it works perfectly. So there's some special abilities for the harder to use tiles, which kind of, you know, tries to make players use them more. But for the most part, and they're interesting. They're all different. You know, an X lets you play on any other one because of how hard it is to play. There's some cool stuff here. I haven't gone over everything, but I really, really like word domination. Anyway, guys, I've got a few more comments, but I wanted to hear your guys' thoughts. Andy, first of all, when am I going to be able to get you a copy of this? When are you going to be requesting it? Andy, I couldn't hear you, dude. I saw you mouth the word never, but I can't hear you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, word games are, I'll play them over trivia games. But that's not saying much.
Andy's never going to play a trivia game. He's never going to play a word game, and he's never going to play Dominion unless his wife busts it out. That means my gift to Christina is going to be a copy of Dominion.
Oh, yeah, she probably won't play that. I don't know. Word games are hard for me, like, basically because I'm fairly convinced I probably have undiagnosed dyslexia, having seen my son basically being diagnosed and me making very similar errors. So the problem for me going into a word game is word games fall into that category like that, and trivia games where it very much depends on like a skill set or knowledge that you have going into the game. So I just always end up finding them frustrating because my knowledge is super deep about things I'm obsessed about, like board games and science. But if I get into a trivia game and like draw the card, it's like famous, you know, musicals, and I'm just like, oh, for the love of God, just pass. I'm not going to get it. Okay. So I don't know. I typically don't like that kind of game because it just feels like, you know, it really doesn't depend on you knowing the game and thinking through it. It just depends on how much crap in your head you're bringing into the game.
It's really prior knowledge is quite a bit of it. Yeah, I agree.
So I find that, I don't know, I have found that to be a very frustrating experience.
There's a rule here by which you can, like, you're supposed to be able to find words for other players. You know, like you can, it has a whole system, like a pretty fleshed out one, but ultimately you're getting compensated for those for finding a word for another player. So it's not going to fix, you know, that dominant player in your group is not only going to be able to figure out their own words, they'll just basically dictate the pace of the game and be able to get points when it's not their turn. I think that a lot of things here are really well constructed and very lean, and I like that, but it's not, you know, it's not going to win you over if you're not a word game fan, which I'm interested to hear from you, Trent. What do you think about word games in general, and maybe your interest in what I've said so far?
I would be willing to play what you've said, but I have a hard time really determining from your description whether it would be the right type of thing for me or not. I like word games just fine, but I tend to think of word game, and my first thought is Scrabble, and I basically view Scrabble as an abstract. So
Mhm.
The question is how do you make a word game into diplomacy, Trent? That's what's
There's kind of an element of diplomacy almost here, because you are like, essentially it's just this grid of letters that's already out at the beginning of the game, and you're trying to use those letters to make words. And I think the higher the player count, the easier it is to make bigger letters, because there's just more letters there. And your ultimate goal is to use every letter twice and do that before anybody can do it again on your turn. And you're only allowed to use one word a turn. But like, for example, my wife, probably the best single word played in our entire game was the word chairperson. And that was a huge word, like 11 letters, and it covered like tons of what was out there. And she came within a point of winning, even though her last turn was pointless because I wrecked it. I ruined it for her.
And just to say, there seems like there's like a lot of word games coming out at Gen Con this year. Like, I swear, every time I turn around,
his new one is word based, isn't it?
Yeah, I swear every time I've turned around or jumped on Board Game Geek, it's like, up there at the top is another word game. They seem to be like the big thing this year or something. I
don't know. I backed this in Kickstarter a while ago, Andy. So I mean, I've been waiting on this one for a little while. But I'm really happy with it. It looks similar to paperback, and I actually say I like this one a little better. At least, there's a sequel coming out for paperback, but I really hope that it solves that like make the same boring word over and over and over problem. Yeah. And it was mainly a deck building game with sort of a word theme. But yeah, not to say that there's anything wrong with that. It was a fairly simple deck builder at that too. Mm-hmm. My question, though, Andy, that came up as you were talking is how you really enjoy things that you're sort of obsessed about. And I was thinking about how, like, you really like Phil Eklund games because of how interested you are in the theme. How close, and I know this is totally going back to the beginning of our episode, and maybe Josh will edit this in, maybe he won't. How close is, like, Comancheria to, say, like, a Phil Eklund interpretation of a science theme?
It's kind of different. Like, Phil Eklund has a lot more roll for success categories and stuff that happen in those. Comancheria doesn't feel like as much as the world's out to get you. Mm-hmm. Like, it's definitely like there's crises here and there, but it's not quite like the Phil Eklund game where basically every round you turn over the event card and go, okay, how's the world going to take a colossal dump on me now? So, yeah, I mean, it's a matter of mechanism and theme and stuff like that, but I would say Comancheria feels less random to me than a Phil Eklund game typically will.
Uh-huh. Okay, yeah, thanks for that, Andy. I know it's totally off of my review right now, but anyway, if you check our chat, if either of you guys check our chat, it's a discussion of 18xx games, Andy, because it's been 2 weeks and you're back here and you're not reviewing an 18xx game. What is going on here? I'm sure the guys are going to comment all about this, but like, there's no 18xx discussion, even though, Andy, they missed out on last week. Explain yourself.
Now, we are playing a couple right now, so that'll probably come in a week or so because we're doing 1880 and 1867. And I'm just trying to make sure I don't crash and burn in those, but yeah, we'll see.
Okay.
Oh, and we're doing, I think maybe if the stars all align, we're doing 18 Ireland this Sunday. So that'll be my second play of that. We'll see if I can win it 2 in a row. I'm still not sure how I won it at HeavyCon at this point. So
mm-hmm. Nice. So that's our reviews here today. Kind of 3 fairly, well, Andy, about as light as Andy gets there with Comancheria, but the other games we talked about are fairly light games. Anyway, our topic here today is something you'll find in a lot of light games, and specifically in the sort of mass market games that I would consider. It's one of those where many times when games include some of these mechanisms, I start to think to myself, if I deep down consider that a game or more of a simulation, or even better defined, like an exercise in moving pieces on a board. And that's just my own personal, like, I totally get that that's, I'm not trying to define that for everybody. It's just when I think about it, it's like, So we're talking about bad mechanisms, or ones that we feel are bad, like ones that we view as being not really something that you should be making a part of games in the modern board gaming era. So specifically, Andy, you had asked to make this a board game topic after we had a little bit of a discussion just in our local group chat. So would you like to tell at all about this topic?
Yeah, so we were talking about particularly the kind of the idea of output randomness, input randomness, but mainly about sort of a roll for success kind of situation and output randomness. Mostly it's centered around the idea of like, you know, a check for battle or something like that. Like, do I roll to hit? And kind of, I think my views on those have changed a little bit because those can be used to some good effect where it makes sense to use them. And so I have found that I am not bothered by them where they are used intentionally and to a purpose. And so, for example, in Phil Eklund games, particularly of the science variety, those kind of rolls for success are based on historical principles. So, you know, I have to roll this and my chances of success are this percentage because I'm trying to kill a stinking polar bear. Of course, I'm going to die horribly doing that. Whereas if you do this, maybe it's easier, maybe it's more simpler. In war games, you know, I think it's easy to just accuse them of, okay, well, you're rolling to hit because that's what you do in a war game. But I actually kind of looked up, I haven't had a chance to play this yet, but the Conflict of Heroes series, Guadalcanal, Awakening the Bear, and stuff like that. One of the things they talk about in the rule book is how much research went into the randomness of that. And so in this game, for example, you generally roll 2d6, and you know you have to beat certain statistics with that. Well, rolling the 2d6 is the base. So that's the base level of randomness of a hit or not. And what they have done is for the different units that are represented in the game, they've gone back and actually researched the combat effectiveness of that platoon. And so that platoon will have certain modifiers to that roll of how easy they are to, you know, attack or be attacked, or how good of shots they are based on historical principles. So in my world, that's not using dice as a lazy design. That's a base, and they've really done some work to go back and see, okay, well, if I use this, this is how they should behave because of this aspect of history. Dice done in that way makes a little more sense to me, and especially used in the sense of battle, because battle is, you know, there's a lot of things that go into play there. It's hard to know how that's all going to pan out. You know, maybe you think you have crack troops, but maybe they are at the breaking point and they're ready to flee. Or maybe your general's having an off day, or the weather's against you. Trying to sort of simulate all of that through a card draw could be difficult, that kind of thing. And that's where it might make sense to have a dice roll, but a dice roll done with careful consideration. So modifiers based on this, based on that, that kind of thing. That doesn't bother me so much. When you kind of go to something that has less historical principles, or if you're just using dice because you want to use dice, and that might bother me a little bit more. Randomness that's not done intentionally, but just done because you want randomness, that's a little less tasteful to me. But like I said, you know, an example in Comancheria, the dice serve very specific purposes. There's a lot of modifiers associated with that roll, so you can kind of push your luck, kind of not, depending on how you want to do it. So that can often be thought as bad by a modern board gamer. Those can be good if they're used with precision and with careful consideration. So I think in a lot of war games, there might be some dice just because that's what you do, but a lot of it's to simulate fog of war. There's other things. So they have some good justifications for it. To contrast that with, say, I don't want to get into a bashing on Stefan Feld, but he uses dice as just as a pure mechanism thing. That to me is a little less tasteful because it's not really based on anything. You just did it because you kind of want this in your interlocking puzzle thing. So I'm a little less forgiving of them in that situation, which might be completely biased for me, and I'll admit that. Necessarily there's such a thing as a bad mechanism anymore, and have a decent mechanism used badly, if that makes more sense.
Yeah, boy, where do I start here? There's a lot to unpack, Andy.
We'll start out big, right?
Yeah. First off, why don't you go, Trent? Because I am. There's a lot of little pieces, and I kind of want to hear from you first.
Dice are good as a simulating factor. Like Andy said, they work if they're trying to simulate something specific and not there just to be part of the puzzle. I mean, if dice have a purpose in terms of being a source of generating some degree of randomness in a game, like that's the point, is like you're trying to simulate a truly random event, I'm fine with them. And then the game should become, if it's a well-designed game, figuring out ways to minimize the impact of that roll or maximize the results of that roll. You're basically trying to work around it to get the result that you want. But you know that you can't fully rely on it. If you bank everything on a die roll, well, you're like a gambler in Vegas. Good for you. But a lot of times that's going to backfire in your face disastrously. So what you got to do, I mean, that to me is fine. That's a game decision choice. That's a game decision that you're making. Great. Decide to do however you want to do it, but that means there's still a decision behind it. It's not the core of the game is still your decision. It's not rolling a die and then having to do what it says. It's whether you're making the decision before the die roll or after the die roll. I prefer it before the die roll. That's all I got to say about it.
So you prefer output random then? You prefer making a decision and then rolling a dice to see whether or not it worked?
Yeah, I think I do, because that's like think of a battlefield. You can have the best plan in the world, but when you go on the battlefield, there's no guarantee that things are going to go the way you want. That to me is what a die roll is.
The only war game that I'm thinking of that I can really pinpoint as having like you rolling dice before and letting you make choices from them is like War of the Ring. And as long as I've never played it, but the Star Wars one, Rebellion, the War of the Ring, Star Wars. So do you dislike that system where you're rolling the dice that give you the options of what type of actions you can take?
Yeah, and in whether or after the dice roll, it doesn't matter to me too much, other than it does matter to me in the point of what kind of game we're trying to play here. So in a war game sense, I think I actually prefer that decision to be made before the dice roll, because the dice roll to me there is simulating all the random aspects that can come into play in a combat situation. Now, if we're playing a thinky Euro game and it's much more about sort of the puzzle to be solved, then I would prefer the dice roll and decisions to be made based on them. Think Alien Frontiers, Castles of Burgundy, things like that. If it's a Euro game, I much prefer that situation. I don't want output randomness as much in that setting. But in a situation where there is going to be some randomness, that makes sense. So, for example, also with that, the Phil Eklund game that's really been a turnoff to a lot of people, BIOS Genesis. There's been a lot of people who really like it, a lot of people that really don't. That game has a butt ton of random in it, but it's trying to simulate chemical processes in sort of basic evolution. That's a very, very random process, scientifically speaking. So if they're trying to simulate that, it makes sense that there is that much randomness. Now you can just say, I don't want to deal with that. I don't want to play that kind of game. That's fine. But that's the story the designer is going for there is the randomness. You can't really play a game like Biogenesis without a lot of randomness, because randomness was how existence was back then. So if you made a Euro game out of Biogenesis and removed the randomness, the theme would be lost and destroyed, because there's just no connection there. It wasn't an orderly step-by-step puzzle to solve.
Yeah. Trent, any response to that?
No, I'm pretty in agreement with Andy for the most part on this. I find my heart's in the same place on this type of thing.
All right, you guys are wrong. Now, so to give a little bit of a deeper look at the reason we're talking about this, I kind of mentioned just a little bit of frustration in our group chat, because I've recently had an experience where I really liked a game, but it had like what I considered dice combat, where you're rolling a bunch of dice. This game is called Time of Crisis. I really liked the things that were new that the game brought to the table, but I felt like other aspects of the game, like the way that you built armies and the way that these armies, no matter, like it was increasingly more difficult to make an army bigger, meaning that like if you had an army that had 2 in it, you have to pay 3 to add your third. And whereas, your first army is really easy to get. So what you end up is all these like little army groups that are walking, like marching around. And so because of that, it just seemed like you were almost always rolling almost the same amount of dice as each other, because it was prohibitively expensive to have big forces. And then it was all based on who got the hits that they needed. And I was really frustrated that it felt like, to me, like the actual decisions that you got to make in the game sort of were betrayed by this output randomness of dice. And it sounds to me like you guys both prefer that type of a system. Both think of it as like, the dice, that making decisions and then seeing if your decisions were okay with the dice is what you guys like to see. And I think that I'm just about, would you guys agree that that's kind of what you've both said here?
Yeah, I would think so.
Yeah, I would say for the most part, because at least with Time of Crisis, granted I haven't played yet, but yeah, I mean, there is an element of risk of how you set that up. Like if you're using legions, they have much better chances to hit than, say, infantry do, right?
Mm-hmm.
They
do. They have a better chance, but I mean, like, you could end up just it's not that different. I mean, your difference is essentially a 1/3 versus a 2/3 chance of hitting, which I mean is different, but like it's still like a 1/3 chance is fairly likely. And I mean, like, it just seemed like it happens so frequently that these numbers and the specific way that they were handled was just like, it took one player out of the game. Like the fact that he lost an early battle, and he got no compensation or anything, and he was just sitting there with an invading force that was slowly tearing down the usefulness of one of his home territories. By the way, how did that force get there? Randomness of an event die roll. To me, it just felt like all these things that I like about this game are being totally obscured, and I can't focus on this game competitively. But it sounds to me, Andy, like you're not talking about playing a game competitively. You're talking about essentially taking a history course or a science course in the form of a board game. And that's basically what you're saying Biogenesis is, that you couldn't have a game and have it not have randomness and have it be about this theme. That it's impossible to teach you what you need to know about this specific, the designer specific purpose here without having it be all this output random and stuff. And to me, like, if I was going to take a history course and I learned that it was through games and I learned that this game had really high randomness, I would be like, this makes so much sense. Like here I am on this side of the battlefield. I've rolled this many dice. Like I'll start making these excuses, because essentially what we're doing at that point is we're role playing. We are taking on like this, the idea that we are on this side of the battle. And whenever I'm playing, to me, I'm thinking more like just strategically how to best my opponent. You know, what is it that the dice are offering me in terms of choices? And what you said, Andy, like, just really made no sense to me about that Castles of Burgundy. What it does with dice is like essentially has like the way that you phrased that was like, here you've got the dice being used to essentially play with mechanically, whereas in other games it's just like, no, they're just randomness. It's like you want dice specifically to be used only as an RNG, to be used only in their most base form. Like, did you succeed? Did you fail? Roll dice C. That's the only use dice should have. Because what Feld has done is he's done what you said you like about dice, Trent, where the randomness is a part of the game. But in Castles of Burgundy, you can really set yourself up to give yourself options so that you don't have to be stuck to whatever you're rolling. If you keep on rolling a fairly, like, statistically somewhat normal spread, and you're making yourself so that you're not pinholing yourself into a specific option, those dice are essentially a player in the game that you are beating, that you are also fighting against together with everybody else. It's a one versus many where the randomness is the one. And that's what I love about dice specifically. So I mean, like, I didn't want to make this entire topic just about dice, but that's the way that it's handled. In Time of Crisis, it totally pulled me out of that game. It made it so that I was like, man, I love this so much. I love this system that I've never seen used before. And I liked the elections because the dice rolls were like, it only mattered if you rolled a 6 or a 1, and that's unlikely. But then I saw that Hands in the Sea, which is a game I've been really excited about, though I hadn't quite like looked deep into it. It's based on A Few Acres of Snow, which does no dice in its combat. By that, it makes it so that you really feel like the finite resources at your disposal. However, in Hands in the Sea, everything that in A Few Acres of Snow was a force is now, is a strength. Now that strength just equals how many dice you get to roll on Hands in the Sea. And I just, when I read that in the rule book, I was like, man, I've just been burned bad by this randomness. And I don't think I could take another disappointment like that quickly.
Yeah, I guess when I was saying the comment about Feld is how did I want to put that? I don't know. I didn't get enough sleep last night. To me, it matters if the dice is there for a reason, or is it just an aspect of the puzzle? So in a Feld game, there's no reason for them other than the puzzle. And that's where, for me, I don't know, I'm a little, I don't know, like the dice is worker thing has been popular lately, kind of like that. And for that, I don't know, like, it's a thing. It's not one of my favorite ways of going about it, but it's a thing. But when the dice are used in, say, a war game sense, from at least my little experience so far, which is little experience, don't get me wrong, but they're generally based on some historical principle, historical facts, knowledge, something like that. It's not just they're not used in, say, the same way as dice are in a game of D&D, where it's like, how much damage does a longsword do? 1d8. That sounds good. That seems a little more haphazardly thrown together. Whereas the randomness generator in that is something else. But I mean, basically in those situations, they actually are used just as a randomness generator to simulate the random aspect of combat. It wasn't always dice that were just used for that. Back in the day, because war games have been around for quite a long time, and meeting players was very difficult. So I was reading about this a few months ago, but a lot of people did sort of correspondence war games with each other, kind of like correspondence chess. What they ended up using, because they needed a source of randomness for battle outcome, and you don't want to be like, hey, I've rolled all 6s. What a coinky dink. I got crazy luck and I'm destroying you left and right. They needed like an impartial element for the randomness. So apparently they used stock prices out of like the paper. So, this stock went up, so I got one more hit against your troop than you did mine, or something like that. Which is kind of crazy, but it was a source of randomness they could use, because the stock market seems rather random sometimes.
But I mean, like, the thing is, though, you could kind of see and maybe make your decisions based on prior behaviors there, or maybe like based on factors that you could kind of analyze. Because I think, to me, it's just every time I see that, you know, that dice roll, I've seen it work really, really well before, right? Like, it's not just dice combat. Like in Mare Nostrum, I really like the way that you always know going into a battle that if you bring 2 troops, you're guaranteed a hit, as long as you don't roll like snake eyes. So it's essentially a 1 in 36 chance you roll nothing, and then you're very unlikely to get 2 hits, but it could happen. So I mean, to me, like, I understand like the sort of drama that it creates, and that's what I think like really like is what they're going for, this pull you into this drama. But to me, I want it to be actual drama, that, and not just like, I don't want it to be the difference between rolling a 3 and rolling a 4. I want it to be the difference between rolling a 1 and rolling a 6, you know? And that's why I think I prefer Mare Nostrum so much, because the randomness happens, and yes, it's like worth the stand-up dice roll, but it's so rare that it doesn't feel like that's who's winning the game. So that's, yeah, and I'm totally afraid of chaos like crazy. Like I just got some news today, and I'm not going to go into my personal life, but I just got news today that made me actually tell the person giving me the news, this is why I don't like randomness in my games, because I have so little control over my actual elements of my actual life, that why would I want this in my game? So anyway, it just kind of rubbed me that way. I really want to play hands in this game. I'm so excited that it's based on like this Martin Wallace amazing design that I've loved so much, but gosh, like, just roll a 3, roll a 5, they hit on this, everything just gets you a dice for your leader. Like, how could somebody say, I'm going to remake A Few Acres of Snow, except I'm going to add dice combat to it? How could somebody have said that, and the people that were around them not been like, dude, what makes A Few Acres of Snow special is it doesn't use dice combat. It finds a way to, you know, still teach about that historical time, which you're talking about, Andy. You know, it teaches about this, which honestly, though, dude, if I'm going to learn the history of something, I'd rather read a book, be it a history book or a novel that's about that, than I would, like, you know, actually invest my own strategy and thought into a competitive experience. Like, I'm fine with playing co-ops. Like, if we're playing a co-op, for example, if we were to make, you know, like a cooperative game, there's some historical cooperative games like that have some element of randomness in it, like
Freedom, the Underground Railroad.
Freedom does. It has a dice roll, but it's, I mean, there's still like a lot of predictability in Freedom's randomness. I'm trying to think if there's just any that are teaching. There's got to be some by GMT. I mean, like Navajo Wars you mentioned, and there you've got dice rolls in that, right?
I think, I mean, you need a bigger source of randomness in co-ops or solo games. Otherwise, they're basically a puzzle. Like, you can play solo roads and boats, but it's basically just an efficiency puzzle. If I give you this, how efficient can you be? What's the highest score you can get? And once you've gotten that, it's not like there's a solvable highest score you can get. And if you have no randomness, and that's all your puzzles become. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Which can be fine if that's the experience you're looking for. But and I think that's kind of the thing here, is it depends what story the game's trying to tell. And so if it's a battle kind of game, if it's a war game, it's trying to tell a story of war. And the unexpected happens in war. That makes sense. If a game is trying to tell the story of running factories a la Arkwright, there's less randomness in there, but there is actually some random events in Arkwright. They don't swing things a whole lot, but they're there. And that kind of makes sense to me. I guess I'm just saying, when I have my randomness, I do want it to be for a reason, that it was intentionally and carefully crafted and put in there to generate a certain feeling or experience from it. If it does that, that's fine with me. Now, it may not be a game you want to play, but that's fine. Just, I don't like playing those kind of games. Story over. To call it bad, I think, is wrong, only in the sense that if it's bad or lazy.
It'd be like calling, for example, a game that you've never played bad.
Yeah. I don't say Dominion's bad. I just say I don't want to play it. But anyway,
no, you just said Dominion's bad earlier. You said it's right below this game. That's giving it a.
That's just because I like giving everybody shit.
I know this, Andy. Anyway, the thing is, that's kind of why I also say this is the thing is, like, here's the thing. If I'm going to play a game for its historical value, I cannot at the same time be also invested entirely in its competitive aspect if it has that randomness. Like it just, it's because I'm there then to simulate history. I'm not there to play a game. I'm there to essentially use this framework to see how history plays out. And that to me is not my definition of what a game is for me specifically. Doesn't mean there's anything wrong with enjoying that. It's just not something that I've been okay with. And here's the main thing that I said. We got a lot of 18xx guys here participating in the chat, and I'm reading everything you guys are saying. Some really interesting stuff there. But here's the thing that I presented to Andy. Let's take an 18xx game. Let's take 1846, right? 1846. Let's say that instead of it being a specific predetermined amount of money that each place on the map is worth, let's say that each of the let's say that your dots are all worth either 10 or 20 based on a dice roll, and that all of your population centers are worth your dice roll times 10. So they could be worth 1, they could be worth 6. And the reason we're doing this is because your specific industries that are coming from each thing, maybe it was a bad year. I mean, let's start making excuses, Andy, like you did. Let's start saying maybe your CEO has been laundering from the company in that city. Maybe you have to deal with the burning of the River Cuyahoga. Maybe you have to deal with a shortage of a specific thing that you needed to refine that you had no control over. Maybe it was just a really bad year for something. Maybe it was a really bad season. And I mean, you're abstracting. These in 18xx games, you're generally abstracting multiple kind of years, aren't you? I mean, it's not usually like those railroads didn't get totally immediately built overnight. So, I mean, yes, TC in our chat says he wants this 18xx game. And Andy, how would you like that 18xx game?
It depends what it's honestly trying to do. What's the setup? So, for example, an 18xx game that actually has an event in it is 1849, which is the volcano erupting.
But how do you know it's going to happen? Did the people in Sicily know that was going to happen at that specific time every single time? No. And players are actually in control of when it happens. That's bull. Like, a volcano doesn't talk to people. It doesn't explode when a certain train is taken. Like, that's all looking backwards onto history and saying this is when it happened. We can all make decisions based on when it actually happened. No, they didn't know that. That's crap.
I know, but I actually could see a modification to that game, though, is say, there is some predictability to a volcanic eruption periodically. Like certain volcanoes, every 10,000 years, you can basically expect an eruption. So I could see a situation where you have, say, a deck of cards for the volcano. Okay, we entered a new train place, flip card, eruption or not. So that maybe there's some predictability.
What do you think about that, Joe? We got Joe Wiggins in our chat here, and I'm really interested to see what he thinks about your new fan-made variant for 1849. Maybe we could even get this one off to Tony Fryer, because I know how much he loves himself some 1849. And I think Kyle has been here in our chat as well. Kyle Nauman of the Dual Gauge podcast, who's definitely going to know what Tony would say about that.
But I'm just saying, if that's the story you're trying to tell within the game, that's something you could do. 18xx generally is all about abstracting out that kind of thing and looking at it from a pure numbers perspective. However, you could make a train game that doesn't try to do that could have events. I'm trying to think that Railways of the World, didn't they make a game that has some events or something for that? I think.
I don't know, Andy. I know that the dice in Age of Steam are one that I am willing to stand, and most everybody else who really likes heavy games willing to stand. It just feels like it just kind of determines the timing and not necessarily the success of a specific thing. And since you can, there's a lot, a lot of potential. You can see where it's going to come out, what's going to come out, and where. It's just a matter of when. And I think that the fact that it's tied to the timing and you're rolling so many dice, and I mean, it seems to me like there has been definitely games of Age of Steam. Trent, wasn't your first death spiral because a certain cube, a certain like 2 cubes just never came out?
Yeah, but I chose to bank my strategy on that. That's my own fault. I don't say, oh, it was the dice's fault. This game sucks because of the dice.
No, I'm not trying to say that.
I made the choice to put myself in that position. That was my decision to wait way too much of my strategy based around the outcome of those die rolls. That was my choice, and I paid for it. I don't want. To me, that is the game simulating what happens when economies grow at a kind of a random pace based on the individual events going on in a city. That's what the dice rolls and Age of Steam are supposed to represent. They're representing the fact that you can't exactly predict what's going to happen in the future in the economy of a city. You can't. That's what the dice represented. You think this town's going to be all great, and you're banking on it being great in the future, and then like you have a generation or two of complete idiots in the town, and they never build any sort of economy. You can't predict that. That's part of Age of Steam. I'm okay with that. It's the same thing when I'm playing like U.S. Civil War. Pickett's Charge, for example. Pickett thought that was a great idea, and he went for it. He knew that there was a good chance of it failing, but he knew there was some chance of success. And guess what? It was kind of random, the events that happened, and he didn't know, but he made that choice anyway. Those kind of choices are interesting to me when they're simulating something in the real world. I find that more interesting to me, more compelling than the reverse of like Castles of Burgundy, where I roll a die, and basically what those die rolls do is they make it so that you can't really plan very much long term because you're thinking my next turn only works if I roll a 4. To me, they're both though. I mean, it doesn't. It's the same randomness either way because you're still talking about a sequence of turns. But at least in a war game or in a game where it's actually simulating a real-world event, it's interesting. In a game like Castles of Burgundy, you're still relying on the outcome of a die roll. Maybe you can mitigate it. You can mitigate it in both types of games, depending on what you choose. But at least in a game where it's simulating some sort of real-world event, it's compelling and makes me think. When it's just there to be there, I don't care for it.
I understand what you're saying. I mean, to me, the real world equivalent of whatever I'm doing in a game is usually it's a nice plus to have in a game, but it's never something that I'm willing to sacrifice any sort of gameplay. And as Joe Wiggins said in our chat here, that's a lot of times random events have to do with that. But then we had a comment from Adam saying that random events are handled really well in Dominant Species, which I think I'm really interested in that because that's clearly like, no player, like who are you playing as in Dominant Species? It's like you're playing as like the god of whatever creature you are. But I guess because you have control over such abstract processes that normally, obviously there's not going to be any concerted entity that has specific control. You're kind of playing almost like the role of natural selection, and you have a specific stake in the battle. Anyway, you're able to see what events are available. They're always going to be the same ones. You always work through the same events. It's just when do they come out? Kind of like Age of Steam that way. But Age of Steam isn't necessarily a given that it's going to come out. But here you actually draft these events, and you get to the ability to draft them by taking that as an action, but that happens after the end of the round. So you have to kind of still be present on the board before that can matter. And that to me is an example of something where it plays with mechanisms and it plays with its content equally. And it to me, it's what puts it so high instead of striking it down by somebody like sort of I almost feel like it's like a collagen injection in somebody's face, like this sort of, like somebody's got Botox, like this game is getting Botox, to sort of give it theme, to give it some more substance. And to me, it's it kind of works against it. Yep.
So I mean, and that's fine though. Like I said, though, everybody's going at games for different experiences. And like I said, the only time I think you can truly, honestly call a mechanism bad is if it was not used intentionally for good reason. Because it's the kind of argument people use. We might have even made this argument in the past that. Everyone's just like, well, auctions are a lazy game design when I don't want to balance things. That may not be true. There might be reasons they didn't want to balance the game to begin with. So, for example, Princes of the Renaissance. The game is about the auction. They didn't balance that for a reason. Because some things are better than others. And can you afford to spend enough on it to make it work right? And so I think, like I said, the only time I think is when you can really call it a bad choice is when it was just used because, I could slap a game together quick. This is where I think a lot of mass market games are failures on this. Let's make this a roll and move game. Why? Because everybody knows what a roll and move game is and will sell a lot of copies. That's bad game design. But if I use roll and move, actually, what is it? Ludology did one on this recently and they brought up that Formula D was basically a roll and move game done correctly. That there's more to that roll and move than there was in Monopoly or other games of that ilk. And I was like, yeah, you know what? Yeah, they're kind of right. I mean, I still don't particularly like playing Formula D, but they were right. That is roll and move done in a much more game interesting way because you've got choices. Do you want to shift up and roll more? Do you want to shift down? You've got some agency there. So that's how I feel about all game mechanics. If it looks like the designer had some intention there, then that kind of is okay with me. I may still choose not to play that game.
I think, Andy, you kind of brought up like a game like Life. And to me, essentially what Life is it's a victory track sort of where you're just stopping at certain spots. And I mean, think about it, though. From the very beginning to the very end, it does have the general events in the specific order that people usually would play, would like life events. And they're fairly generic to be able to apply to the widest audience possible. And the game basically tells you the outcome of each phase of your life without you making any real decisions. And I don't see how that's all that much different from the game telling you what the outcome of a battle is based on, because you're rolling a die. So, I mean, like roll and move, to me, like that sort of output randomness, as Adam was mentioning earlier, is to me like just it can be okay. Like in the times that we've said, guys, if we're playing a game more to learn about something, or in my opinion, with co-ops, I'm okay with this, with there being no randomness or just solo games, because I'm okay with that randomness because I'm not, I'm not engaged in trying to think over the other player at the table. It just, to me, it's like trying to focus on music when somebody is screaming in my ears is what it's like to be dealing with a heavy amount of output randomness in a game.
Yeah, and I think for me, it matters less if it was done, like I said, with deliberance, with careful thought, and also that you have some choice into how that output randomness plays out. So I think in a lot of games that use it well, you had an ability to affect that. Okay, well, I sent in this many troops, that allows me this many dice or whatever. Or I trained up troops to be crack troops, that gave me a better chance. So there's still a chance you could fail, but you can kind of like do things to hedge your bets. I think, for me, one of the things that was kind of off-putting about Sekigahara for me was it often felt like the winning of a war or combat was predetermined, in the sense that oh, I had this many blocks, I had this many cards, so this was the maximum I could have generated. Like, you can end up in a situation in that game where you are definitely going to lose or you're definitely going to win. And doing that kind of removes those sort of great battles of history idea, like, the battle of the, oh God, I can't say the Spartans against the Persians, the 300 or something like that. If it's a deterministic combat setting, then the 300 never could have won. They never could have done what they needed to do. But dice can kind of simulate that aspect of it. But like I said, some people don't want to play that kind of game, and that's absolutely fine. And there's, like I said, places where it works and places where it doesn't. If the dice roll's there for a reason other than just, hey, I like dice rolls, that to me is a little bit better than some others. And I think that's the way with a lot of mechanics. I don't know if there's, any mechanics that are truly bad, but there's mechanics that can be used badly. Like even take that games. There's some take that in games that is fine. There's some that's not so fine. Take that in some of the PAX games doesn't bother me, but in Munchkin it does, because that's kind of all there is, and there's no way I could have planned on you doing a thing in Munchkin. It's like, oh, I didn't know you had this card that screwed me over. But in PAX, if I've been paying attention, I know what card you're collecting. I know what you can do to me. So I guess it doesn't bother me as long as there's choice. Like you brought up the board game of life. If we're talking about like the mass market game, there's only one choice in that whole stupid game. Do I go to college, or do I go down the take the crappy job? After that, you could set a computer to do it, and I could walk away from the table and the results would be the same. Where in some games, I think there's a lot more agency there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think there's more agency there than I am able to parse through. I think that I definitely get hung up, and I'm not saying that that's the case. That should be the case for everybody. But I think I'm glad that you brought up Take That, Andy. And I also want to talk about hidden traders in games. So Take That first, though. You talked about Munchkin. Now Munchkin, I think that by having the Take That in Munchkin, it sort of becomes a game where diplomacy is a pretty big aspect. What do you think about that, Trent?
It does, but it's I like to call that lame diplomacy, because just punching whoever's in the lead is not what diplomacy is in terms of what I think of as fun. I mean, that's just I guess incredibly obvious diplomacy where you all team up to punch the leader. Big whoop. That's boring. I prefer games where there's actually reasons for people to team up beyond just punching the leader, where it's actually beneficial to you beyond just making sure some other dude doesn't win. And so that's part of the reason I don't care for that kind of punch the leader quote diplomacy. It's just not fun for me. I don't like it.
Mm-hmm. So other what are some? I had several other ones there. How about as a hidden trader? I think that, guys, that we can come up with examples of where there being hidden roles. I mean, just in general, having social deduction a part of a game. What do you guys think about what if, what is it that makes Battlestar Galactica work so well? And how is it that, even though it's just it's such a long game and a heavy game and involved game, it's able to handle these hidden roles? Because a lot of the things I kept coming back to when I was thinking about these mechanisms that I consider that I don't like, I'm like, well, if the game is short enough, I don't care. And I don't think that's really the case for you, Andy. Anyway,
Battlestar Galactica works because it nails the theme. That's why that game works. It nails the theme, and the theme is well liked by a lot of people. The game nails the theme. There you go. If you put another theme on Battlestar Galactica, that game would not be very well lauded.
Yeah, that's probably true. And I think for hidden trader elements, once again, if done with deliberate, careful playtesting and such, it can be good. But it can be not good. So for example, the only one I've played besides, I think, Dead of Winter really with Hidden Traders was, what was it? Shadows over Camelot.
Mhm.
And I don't think that game nails the trader element well, at least at all player counts, because a lot of the times when we play this, we haven't played it in a long time, but when we played it as a group of 3, my daughter, my wife, and me. It quickly became apparent to me that if you were the trader in a 3-player game, your best way to win the game was to make sure you get revealed as fast as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And that why do you want a trader if it's going to be obvious? So if I want to play the trader role well in a 3-player game, I'm the trader. I'm going to do my damnedest to make sure they think I'm the trader and reveal me, which is counterproductive to what the trader element should be. Your goal should be to try to remain hidden as much as possible. But in Shadows over Camelot at 3 players, the faster you can get revealed, the faster you can start slapping down things that will stop everybody.
My favorite. Okay, go ahead.
No, that was pretty much it. Go ahead, Trent.
My favorite hidden role games go beyond just simply having a trader. I think that those are kind of dull. My favorite one, honestly, is Two Rooms and a Boom, with some of the more esoteric cards, simply because there's so much going on that, like, it's hard to really determine that, like, what is even happening. You have to use a lot of deduction to figure out what is really happening. It isn't just a matter of putting a beat on who is the quote traitor, because that's not what that game's all about. The game's determining who's on which team and who can do what, and all kinds of things going on. That's actually probably my favorite hidden role game, is Two Rooms and a Boom.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's the thing. They do it really well there. Or what was another element we had down was the memory aspect. And that is used, I think, what did I hear? I haven't played it, but I probably would. In a kid's game. It basically my first Stone Age. Since it's a worker, it's trying to be like your kid's first worker placement game. But the problem with that is that your adults are going to play more efficiently than children. That's just how it's generally going to happen. So what they do is they actually make the places you need to place a memory game. You have to turn over that and know what you're picking, or it fouls you up somewhat. And that's a great mechanism to balance, because there is something about being a kid that you throw down that memory game, like they will remember where every damn card is.
Well, yeah, it's almost like when they're that small, they're just so focused on the game that, like, whatever is happening in the game, since they're learning the game, they're keeping such detailed mental notes of everything that memory
Right.
game just works really well. I remember being a little kid and loving memory as well.
Right. And so that becomes, the memory is useful there because it becomes a balancing mechanism against the adult player. The kid has an edge there that they normally, if I just tried to play regular Stone Age with a kid, I should be wiping the floor with them, because I can make the most optimal decisions that a 7 or 8 year old is not going to probably make. But in this game, that memory element was deliberately and carefully chosen to give the child an edge to be able to compete at the game with an adult at
That's
a
awesome.
play level. So
Yeah.
an element that most people would hate was used thoughtfully, and that's when it's okay.
Mm-hmm. I understand what you guys are saying. Like that there are definitely things that these mechanisms we consider bad. Different ones of us are more upset by different mechanisms. We each have our own preferences. But even when they're used thoughtfully, they can have some valid reason for being there. I'm still like, ugh, to take a game system and to claim that you are designing within a game system and then to add something that just sounds bad to it, to me. And I guess different people are put off by different things. Like if you were to say, like, we're making a few acres of snow, only now you have to deal with the stock market, like Andy said, I'd be like, ooh, I'm really interested. But if it's like it's a few acres of snow, but now you have to roll dice for your hits instead of just it being, based on the strength of your force, I'm like, I just can't get behind it.
Well, in there I might agree with you, because wasn't the point, and I haven't played it, but wasn't the point of a few acres of snow was the randomness came out of your deck. So whether you could succeed in taking something over or not, predicated on you having the correct cards to attack that location with these troops in this situation.
Yeah.
So now essentially what you're doing is you're taking a randomness and throwing on another layer of randomness in the dice roll. And I think then that maybe becomes a little too much. Like if I roll in Comancheria, it's just one layer of randomness. I have set up this force with these capabilities. Now the one layer of randomness. Do I succeed or not? But if you start piling on layers of randomness, that could get pretty frustrating pretty fast. Because I don't know, then it just seems like you have no agency at all. I don't mind randomness as long as I have some agency going into it or coming out of it. If I have no choice, then it's no good.
Here's one, guys, that I think can almost I can almost say this and just universally know that anybody listening to this is probably going to agree with me. But are we right in thinking it's bad? And that is player elimination.
I think, once again, that really depends on what the game is trying to do. Where I have seen player elimination, I think, done okay is on the heavier side of things. I don't like player. Well, like for example, in 18xx, some 18xx games have player elimination, right? I don't think that's necessarily a bad situation, because in some 18xx games, there's the danger of becoming player irrelevant. So in some 18xx, there's basically a loan system you can get. You could get into a situation where an hour into that game, you have no way in heck you are ever going to win it. Oh, I just keep having to take more loans and get worse into debt, and this sucks. Whereas in other 18x games, it's like, okay, you're out. Sorry, that's the way it goes. Hey, go watch TV. We'll play something later. Or, for example, in Through the Ages, where you decide if you're going to be eliminated.
Yeah, but then even in Through the Ages, like if you're playing that multiplayer game, player elimination, like if somebody says like I'm out, then it essentially vastly disadvantages the person that was aggressing them in the first place. But then at the same time, I know people are going to say like, well, they shouldn't have been so aggressive. And a lot of times, like what happens is you got the person with the highest military who attacks the person with the lowest military, and then your guy who's second highest attacks that person again because they've been weakened. And it's like, well, they can't defend against me. And if they quit, then whoever's in first now doesn't have them to punch around.
Yeah. And that's the thing. I think, but I don't know. I've seen player elimination in Age of Steam. I've never really had it come up in a game before.
Yeah, it comes in Age of Steam. It happens to Trent. It happened to Trent that one game.
Oh, yeah, but the game was over at that point.
But that's basically what you're saying, though, is that the game is basically over at that point. There was like a round or two left. I mean, but I understand what you're saying. At that point, it's like a youth, like Trent was essentially euthanized from our game of Age of Steam, right, Trent?
But the deal with the player elimination there is it adds in the element of risk. If there isn't any player elimination, then you have the issue of there's no threat or danger.
I think friendship elimination is the best mechanism.
Yeah, for diplomacy that works pretty well.
That's friendship elimination.
But I think player elimination in a light game to maybe even a medium game is less tasteful. Like it, because player elimination kind of puts people off. I think there's only one mechanism. Yeah. I'm going to go there. I think there's only one mechanism that is just universally bad, period. Lose a turn. Because what's more fun than sitting down to play a game and then not playing that game?
How different, Andy, then? Like, I'm not going to let you away on this one, dude. How different is it if a game forces you to lose a turn versus a game has a penalty that you will suffer if you don't take this specific action, which all it does is get you from getting this penalty? It's like yes, you have a choice of not taking that action, but then you have to suffer this penalty. And if it's a bad enough penalty, it's like, no, my action is predetermined. Like, I don't see how a predetermined turn is any better than lose a turn. What do you think?
My least favorite mechanism is someone else controls your turn.
like what?
Like the turn control card in Diplomacy or in
Dominion. Okay, I was gonna say I know the possession card, which that one is kind of universally disliked by Dominion players. Just
the card Mindslaver in Magic the Gathering does the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, or another thing that's very similar to that is I withheld going crazy at a family game night because of this, because my daughter was getting frustrated and I thought she had a right to be frustrated, was the game Sorry, where you have to draw a certain number to move your pawn out of the start space. So if you go around 12, 20 times and you're not drawing those cards, well, sucks to be you. Mm-hmm. I don't think that that's a good mechanism, because it's like, well, the game's trying to teach you to deal with frustration. But that's not necessarily a fun experience. So, for example, I have not played this, but what I heard was when they The Force Awakens came out, they redid Sorry with a Star Wars theme, but the change they made was any card gets a pawn out. Let's get this game going.
An easy thing that you can just do no matter what. I mean, it just seems so simple. And I would say, Andy, that I don't see how not being able to move off a start in Sorry is all that much different than when you've built a huge force and you roll a handful of dice and get nothing but fails.
Yeah. No, well, you had some agency in that risk, though. You built the huge force.
I got the biggest force I possibly could. The best the game allowed me to get. I rolled all of my dice and fail.
Yeah, but then that once again goes to that is how detrimental is that to you in that situation? If that's the game, if it all comes down to that one roll, yeah, I probably would find that distasteful as well. Now, if it's, well, that wasn't an ideal turn because I rolled like crap. Okay, well, let's try next turn and see how that goes. But yeah, if we were just going to play the most stupid game ever that says, okay, I roll a D20, you roll a D20, and whoever gets higher wins. Yeah, that's not fun.
No, well, I would say though, Andy, also what you said earlier was that the heavier games having player elimination, you accept more than lighter games. And I would say that I'm the inverse of that. I understand why it exists in the heavy games you're talking about. I'm not saying it's a bad thing for it to be there. Not at all. No, I'm totally cool with that. But I think that I'm much more comfortable with player elimination being an incredibly short game, because to me, it's more about the social, the social awkwardness, especially what if I'm having 4 guys over at my house and we're going to play a game that has player elimination and we're all playing for 2 hours. One guy gets eliminated. There's nobody else at my house. There's nothing really for him to do. Does he go home? Does he go home? The game's going to go on another 2-3 hours. Is it, what do you do in that social situation? What's that guy now? Is he now I'm going to go watch TV?
Speaking of someone who showed up at a game night when 4 other players were starting a 2-hour-long game and I showed up about 5 minutes into it, I'll say that you can just go find your own thing to do because that's what you do.
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely what always seems to happen.
Deal.
I've been in that situation too, Trent. I bet there's not anybody listening to this podcast that's not been in that situation. So, I mean, yeah, you deal.
But I think legitimately, yeah, you may go home. If you're playing a 8-hour long 18xx game, that's likely the only game that's going to get played that day. if you played so poorly that you got eliminated, like if that happened to me and I knew there was 6 hours left to go, I'd just be like, okay, yeah, I learned my lessons there. I'll see you guys next week. And then I go home. I think where it becomes an issue maybe is if you're in that long but short time, like you said, maybe a 2 to 3 hour game and you're eliminated in the first half hour. And then it's like, well, yeah, I could go home, but odds are they're still going to play another game or two tonight. So now I got to sit around. Okay.
You got to sit around and make that decision. That's what's really tough because it's like, do you wait, especially if you know that they can't? To me, like the shorter games that have the player elimination, I mean, like Bang the Dice game, it's all about player elimination. I mean, like that's, you know, and think about it, like diplomacy is all about player elimination. And in diplomacy, it's not going to be, you know, you're going to have lots of people playing that game for a long time. Much longer than some. By the way, there's a question here in the in our chat from Jerry here. Have you ever tried drafting the deck in Sorry? Has anybody ever tried this?
Nope. That's a new one on me. I didn't know people did that.
Maybe give that a shot. Yeah, apparently. I mean, it sounds to me like it would be a lot more, you know, having your own personal deck that you're drawing from. Maybe it would be more interesting than that. But I don't know. Drafting the entire deck in Race for the Galaxy seems to me like a little bit much, but I guess, you know, if you're going to be forced to play Sorry, do whatever you can to make it better. That's a good point, though, there.
Yeah, and I just think, you know, like I said, it kind of comes down to just what are you trying to do and what's the audience. So another example is when I play Rhino Hero with Will, which is my son Will, who's 8 now. One of the cards that can be played is Lose a Turn.
Lose a Turn, yeah, it has Lose a Turn. I've played Rhino Hero also.
Right, and we just ignore that just because I'm like,
we still play with it.
I'm like, well, no, legitimately, because it's for a little kid, it's just like, oh, you don't get to do anything, and that's a horrible feeling as a little kid. Like it's just like, come on, let's do something. Games that are meant to be played as a family that little kids, you know, can't run at. Like, oh, I was at this chess tournament with my family, and I wasn't obviously playing chess at that time because I'm not a chess player, but I was watching this young girl and the mother play this card game where like the mother just continually kicked the girl's teeth in, like just destroyed her at it constantly. And, you know, the girl got mad and was just like, you know, I don't want to play this anymore. And the mother's like, oh, you just have to learn to deal with it. And I'm like, no, there's plenty of good games like that kids can compete with an adult on a reasonable level. Dexterity games are a great example. Sometimes kids have like rock solid fingers, whereas like I'm shaking when I'm trying to put a card down. And so why wouldn't you play those games that were made more thoughtfully for different groups? To me, I mean, like I said, no mechanic is really a lazy design unless you had a lazy designer.
That's a wishy-washy statement, Andy. That doesn't really say anything. Like the lazy, what do we mean by lazy designer?
Well, like I said, I think there are some games, and I think these are typically mass market games where it's just like, hey, we got to make some crap to throw on the shelves.
I doubt that there's a designer involved in that process at all. I would say that, you know, nobody's going to put their name on, you know, on a version of, you know, like a version of Sorry that literally does nothing different, you know, like.
Well, okay, here's another example I think of. Anybody that ever did a Kickstarter for a clone of Cards Against Humanity.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lazy designer.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. What do you think about that, Trent?
Crabs Adjust Humidity is not the pinnacle of game design.
Yeah.
That's literally what one of the clones is named.
Yeah, I've seen that one. Crabs Adjust Humidity.
Yeah, it's like that is lazy game design. Why would you put your name?
But isn't Cards Against Humanity in and of itself kind of lazy design because it basically just built on apples to apples, and it even did so like in a more obvious way?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how lazy does it have to be to rip off a rip off?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's a fairly easy statement that's not going to be unpopular with anybody in the hobby. You know, that like if nobody put any effort into this design, and I'm not saying when I say that I don't like specific designs, it just, I don't know. To me, when you take a game system that does something different in a specific way, and then you take that away in your re-implementation, I would say at least have a reason for it. And I think that's one of the big things that comes out of this discussion. We want to see a reason for any of these things that we would consider bad design. And they can not necessarily be bad. I think that honestly, when you use these bad design things in a game where it takes that in consideration and builds a system around it by which that's almost, it almost gets you to warm up to this mechanic you used to hate. That to me is one of the most ingenious ways that designers can really show their caliber, show their minerals.
Well, and I would actually agree with your point maybe on Hands in the Sea there, Joe, because if I had a game that was mostly non-random and then somebody re-implemented it with randomness, another example of this, Star Wars Carcassonne with dice combat. That's unnecessary. I completely agree that that's unnecessary. However, if a game was built to have randomness from the beginning for this specific purpose, that doesn't bother me. Then it comes down to, do I want to play a game that is built like that?
Yeah, I'm totally behind you there, Andy. I'm totally behind you. Like, we've reconciled any differences we had on this topic, I think, by now.
Right.
Well, that's our take on when bad mechanisms turn good, and I think we ended on a pretty high note. So now we're going to go ahead and hype a few board games. But before we do that, there was something extra special. I did a little it was an unannounced contest. I wasn't really planning it or anything, but I packed together 14 different games in boxes, condensed them all so that I could bring them down here to Florida. And then I took them all out of their boxes, and without having any identifying qualities to these games, I took a picture. And one guy in our chat here today, he was in our chat, and unfortunately he had to go, named Adam, he was able to identify all 14 of them. And so I promised him that I would write a haiku for him, and then Trent has agreed to read it in his brown nose voice. Okay, right, Trent? Yeah. Are we still good on this?
Yes, we're still good on this. I have to find the poem. Give me just a second.
I've got it right here. It's got the commas instead of the spaces. If you just get it into our chat.
I think I've got it. I think I'm ready to go here. Adam Brocker is incredible at naming all kinds of board games.
And there you have it, Adam. I hope you enjoy. So, Trent's base, like I said, I apologize to anybody out there who now has to go clean themselves up. Anyway, you can hit the pause button while we move on here to hypes. These are games we're looking forward to.
I did have a comment, Joe, like your thing where you put 14 games out.
Yeah.
Someday I'm going to do that, but I'm just going to put out 14 green cubes from different games.
14 green cubes from different games. Are you
be like, what games did these come from?
14 green cubes, all from different games.
Yes.
Nice. Yes. Board game components like uniformity. Yep. All right.
Those are the thoughts that enter my head randomly.
I once gave a quiz that was like electronically graded, where an answer had a question had 4 answers. They were all identical, but only one of them was checked as right by the system. It was cruel, and I enjoyed it. All those kids worrying about that. All right, so we're going to be hyping some games here, guys. We're going to kick it off here with a hype of... Let's hear from you, Andy, because you've been working pretty hard on a print and play for us.
Yeah, we had him on as a guest before. I can't remember the name, sadly, but
his name is Ray Chandler. Raymond Chandler. Yep. And I've been keeping up back and forth. He announced a different game that he's coming out with as well, but I was really interested because it was not a heavy game. It was a very unique, different game, and I had a little chat with him. Anyway, Andy, I'm taking this from you. You go.
Yeah, so he's working on a game called City of the Big Shoulders, which we talked about when he was on the podcast. Right now, it's kind of available as a print and play. I think he said Kickstarter sometime early next year. And what he's trying to do with this game is kind of make the game that bridges Euro games and 18xx games. So it's got a lot of Euro mechanics in it of worker placement and things like that, but it still has like the stock system of an 18xx game. And then after reading the rules, he kind of set it up to where you can make it a little more 18xx or a little more Euro, depending on the audience you're playing with. But I've been putting that together as a print and play. And because I'm ridiculous when I print and play, I had to mount everything on chipboard instead of just crappy cardstock. So I finally got all of the shares cut out today, but I probably gave myself carpal tunnel doing it. And the nice thing, too, is I have a 3D printer, so that's where all the cubes are coming from. But I'm interested to play it because it does look like an economic game. I've heard some good things about it. And I'm just kind of interested to see where it goes with that and to see how it feels with me in my group. And so anyway, I'm just kind of interested to give it a try. And by God, if I had to cut all this out and print it, somebody's going to play this dang thing with me. So, but honestly, I've heard a lot of good things. I'm interested to see how it does play out and where it kind of falls on the Euro/18xx spectrum.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of stuff to do there, Andy, but I think you're fighting a good fight, man. I'm really excited for this one as well.
Yeah, well, I'm down to charters and the board. Once I got them, we're good.
Nice. That's actually not that much left to do.
No, the shares was the worst part.
Well, yeah, it isn't quite as bad as like an 18xx game. The track is the hardest part, right, of the print and play?
Yeah, that's because I have to mount them on chipboard. Normally the shares I would do as a laminated thing, but for some reason I'm like, let's do everything on chipboard. Then I got halfway through it. I'm like, oh yeah, I remember why I don't do everything on chipboard anymore.
You're talking about First City of the Big Shoulders?
Yeah, exactly.
And oh gosh, man, I'm sorry to hear that. That's rough.
Well, it's better than the first print and play I did of 1889 where I put everything on double thick chipboard.
Yeah, it just sounds like a way to like ruin your fingers, like give yourself carpal tunnel.
Yeah, it wasn't good, man. But anyway, I don't know. It sounds like a semi interesting to interesting economic game, so I'm looking forward to give it a shot.
Yeah, for sure. All right, I'll quickly hype here. The one that I'm looking forward to for this week is a recently released, and I was referring to Martin Wallace earlier for his design, A Few Acres of Snow. This one is called AuZtralia, but it's like spelled with a Z, so like AuZtralia, kind of like AuZtralia. But it's using the same sort of system that was in A Study in Emerald, which is not a popular game. It was my sort of #1 vote for a game that's out of the BGG Top 500, and I wish it were higher on that list. Anyway, AuZtralia is being published, and it's supposed to be coming out to like a few copies rolling out here and there pretty soon, and I'm really hoping to get myself a copy of that because I just absolutely am enamored with the system in A Study in Emerald, even though it is very polarizing. But to me, Martin Wallace can still like. I'm hoping that this is like a big step forward, and maybe he'll be able to even get more types of people to play A Study in Emerald with this new design. So, and also, there's very few games about Australia, and I was pointed that out because we got a guy, really great, a listener that really keeps me on my toes, Stephen Croft. And his comment on Facebook was like, I'm thrilled to see this being about Australia. So I am too. It's a place that we rarely get to see in games. So cool stuff. AuZtralia by Martin Wallace.
And yeah, I wanted to add, I actually put this on my keep an eye on it list because I know I don't know if it's this one, but he talked about a Cthulhu themed train game. that just sounds like, I don't know if I would buy it, but I'm at least going to keep an eye on it.
For sure. All right, and rounding us out here, Trent, tell us about. Could I do the Tom Hanks in Castaway voice? Wilson.
Not that Wilson.
Which Wilson then?
So I'm going to talk about a game that's not yet on the P500, but is going to be in a few months. That game is Wilson. It's the third game in the Great Statesman series from Mark Herman, the follow-up to Churchill and Pericles. It's a 4-player game. There's basically no actual conflict in it because the entire game takes place at the Paris Conference after World War I. So basically, it's literally not even a war game at all. It's about how the 4 different powers that were victorious in World War I met with very different ideas of what they wanted the post-World War I world to be like, and they negotiate. So basically, it takes the negotiation aspects of Churchill. It's very much looks like it's going to be like a 4-player Churchill, but instead of the board abstractly showing the latter stages of World War II, instead the board abstractly shows different directions of what the world after World War I would look like. How hard are they going to hammer Germany with post World War I reparations? What are they going to do to the Ottoman Empire? Is it going to become what becomes modern day Turkey or what? Like all the different things that people were proposing and fighting over. And basically, like if you play one of the 4 major powers in that, and basically you get points based on whether or not the ideas you had going into the convention win favor.
Mm-hmm.
That's more or less what it comes down to. It seems really interesting.
What's the conflict that's going on in the background, or is there not one like there was in Churchill?
It's the post-conflict.
It's the post-conflict. Literally, it's about the Paris Conference after World War I.
Okay,
like,
but there isn't like...
over.
Is there a place where you're like allocating your dudes that were, because I mean that was a big part of Churchill, is like you had to be able to win the fight against the Nazis like as you were playing.
Yeah, basically they're divvying up Europe is what they're doing. Rather than like saying like they were trying to finish off a war here together, you're actually more antagonistic against each other in Wilson than you were in those, because in this one you're each trying to collect the spoils through negotiation. Well, the way it seems like it's going to work is you have to ally with some people to get some things and ally with other people to get other things. And a lot of it has to do with the order in which issues come up and that's out of the deck.
Mm-hmm.
And the alliances
like
are going to shift a lot. Yeah, it's going to shift a lot during the game.
Cool. I'd be very interested to try that one.
Me too.
Is this one on your radar yet, Andy, or is this the first you've heard of it?
It's the first I've heard of it. I haven't, I'll be honest, I don't think I've P500 anything in that line. Not that I'm against it, just, I don't know. It's one of those like, gotta make the cut somewhere. Now, they look like decent games. I've just never had the opportunity to play one.
Would you continue to get, do you still get coin games, Andy? Because I think if you like coin games, this would be right up your alley by design.
I am, but I kind of backed off a little bit because, like, for example, I still am waiting on Pendragon. And for a while there, I had like Liberty or Death and all of them P500. And I kind of backed off of that because I'm just like, I'm not as much of a fan of modern combat typically.
But if you're honest with yourself, you kind of want Gandhi.
Yeah, just because I want to see how like passive resistance works in a coin game. That'll be awesome. I don't know.
Hey, if you want edgy, I had suggested to Volko a while back that that they do a coin game set during the civil rights movement in the U.S.
Ooh. That could get rough. Yeah. Yeah, that might be.
I don't think that will ever get touched. So.
I don't think you can. Like, I would not be. Yeah, I don't know. It's weird. Like, it's okay to be the Nazis when you're playing like a World War II game. But I really would not feel comfortable. I don't even know.
You don't want to be Bull Connor?
No, yeah. I don't want to. Yeah, it just seems like.
I'd rather be Hitler than Bull Connor. Okay.
I'm not saying I would rather be. I'm not even sure I'm okay with being the Nazis and stuff. I mean, like, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. I mean, I don't know. Joe
doesn't want white meeples with pointed hats on them. Well, that's what he does.
Oh gosh.
Then what about playing as the Taliban when you're playing a distant plane?
There's some people who won't do that. Like that bothers. That's why they have a solo option.
Yeah, it sounded like Trent, you were pretty upset by that, right? Like,
I think I have the further something gets in the past, the less of a problem I have with it. So
but that's
I don't really. I'd be
just
very interested in them doing that kind of a coin game.
Yeah.
I think that would be really interesting. I can see, man, they'd have to be careful with that one.
What if they did an Andrew Jackson game about like essentially subjugating all the Native Americans? What if you do that?
A coin game set in like 1820s.
Isn't that
yeah, where it's just like pushing the Cherokee off their ancestral lands.
That'd be something. You could have 3 Native American factions and then also the United States.
Yeah, and the United
States another one. You better
1820s. Another one. Yeah, an 1820s to 1840s coin game where eventually by the end of it, the U.S. keeps growing in power and the 3 other ones have to ally against them. But early on, they're kind of on equal footing.
Like
let's do it.
It's not that much different.
Come on, Volko. Let's have protests outside your house. You can make it happen.
Yeah, I was just saying, in either one of those situations, you better approach that real carefully.
I was gonna say, it depends on how you handle it. It could probably be done, but yeah, it's. I think that as Americans, we just have this obsession with war, and war is okay. But like when we get into like the actual human side of the conflict, like talking about these different factions and the civil rights movement, it becomes a lot, especially since, well, I don't know, like with Gandhi, that's in colonial twilight, like all these things are kind of like very controversial policies, foreign policies, They could do one where the United States, it's just about the United States like swinging its nuts with the Monroe Doctrine over Latin America, because that happened a ton. Like dictators propped up and cut down, and
just envision this for a second: that they do a coin game in the civil rights movement with 4 factions. You essentially have Kennedy being one, you have the Southern Democrats, Dixiecrats being another, and then you have like Martin Luther King being another one, and then you have Malcolm X being a 4th.
Oh, you're starting to get this pretty fleshed out here, Trent. I feel I'm
thinking about this. I can see this being an utter disaster in terms of offending people.
Yeah, that's the main thing I'm seeing too, man. I'm not seeing really much else actually. But it can be. I'm not saying it can't be done. Well, This is really interesting. Yeah, we've almost hyped a bunch of imagining games.
Imaginative games.
Tatter Bohr here, TC has been pretty much like sharing his 2 cents and saying that in Liberty and Death you can actually crush the Native Americans. I mean, like, so this.
Yes, you can.
Yeah, there is a precedent, but man, that's just the reason I gave that as an example. I don't want you to go with it. Come on, man.
That's worse than my idea for the logistics game about the digestive system.
Andy, that's just gross is all. It would be okay. It's just gross.
Like I would have a problem. Output.
Yeah, all right. Well, anyway, guys, that's about enough of that.
We're ending on a poop note. My job is done.
We're ending on the poop note after we already hit you with Trent's brown noise. So anyway, thank you guys thanks to all of our audience for listening. Thanks to everybody, especially here who participated here in our chat here. It was really great. And I tried to pay homage to your comments and things. If you come back and listen here, we had some awesome comments, and this episode wouldn't have been the same without them. And I especially want to thank my co-hosts here, Andy and Trent. You guys have just been great to bounce ideas back and forth off of. And I think we had a pretty good go of it. Anyway, to do our normal outro here, I am your host, Joe Sallin. Thank you all for listening, and I've been joined tonight by
Andrew Dennison.
Turnahan.
I hope you guys have a great week of gaming, and catch us next week on The Good, the Bored, and the Ugly.